This is what the FBI Anonymous wanted you to know. You need to find Assange today. Definitions of terrorism in U.S. Code 18 U.S.C. 2331 defines international terrorism and domestic terrorism for purposes of Chapter 113B of the U.S. Code entitled Terrorism. Now, listen closely because this is incredibly ironic that this is actually the U.S. definition of terrorism. International terrorism means activities with the following three characteristics. Involve violent acts or acts dangerous to human life that violate federal or state law, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily outside the territorial jurisdiction of the U.S., or transcend national boundaries in terms of the means by which they are accomplished. The persons they appear intended to intimidate or coerce, or the locale in which their perpetrators operate or seek asylum. At the same time, we should return to plans to provide the FSA or some group of moderate forces with equipment that will allow them to deal with a weakened ISIL and stepped up operations against the Syrian regime. This entire effort should be done with a low profile, avoiding the massive traditional military operations that are at best temporary solutions. While this is a paramilitary operation moving forward, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. Now, this is key right here, because the Clinton Foundation has been taking donations, massive donations, contributions from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which is indeed a form of indirect support of terrorism against the U.S. and other nations. This is hard evidence that the U.S. destabilized Africa in order to get Clinton elected. This is how Secretary Clinton empowers ISIS. Assange outlines how Clinton committed treason, not merely pay to play. Now pay attention because it is far more subtle and not nearly as inflammatory as American audiences would like. Clinton knew that Saudi Arabia and Qatar were arming ISIS while Secretary of State, and they still gave weapons to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, though we know them to fit the FBI's definition of terrorism. This is what FBI Anon was talking about. This is giving aid and comfort to an enemy of the state by using the State Department. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. Before anyone criticizes to say it's Russia Today propaganda, it was produced by Dartmouth Films, a UK film company, and sold to broadcasters outside of the UK, RT being one of them. He talks about WikiLeaks' criticism of Russia anyways. CNN reported that ISIS was armed with American weapons in December 2015, just a few months after The Guardian reported. A recently declassified secret U.S. intelligence report written in August 2012, which uncannily predicts and effectively welcomes the prospect of a Salafist principality in eastern Syria and an Al-Qaeda-controlled Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. In stark contrast to Western claims at the time, the Defense Intelligence Agency document identifies Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS. and fellow Salafists as the major forces driving the insurgency in Iraq. I don't know why I said Iraq, Syria. And states that Western countries, the Gulf states, and Turkey were supporting the opposition's efforts to take control of eastern Syria. If you are a liberal, ask yourself how you feel about Iran-Contra, and if you would want to be the one defending it for the next 50 years. Because this mass migration taking place in Europe is the biggest thing to happen since World War II. This brings us to the refugee crisis in Europe. This is projected to cost Germany alone well north of $1 trillion over the next 2 decades, a cost which would conceivably be passed on to the US because of America's insistence in supporting terrorist states. ISIS claimed responsibility for attacks on Belgium when they bombed the airport at Brussels, France at Charlie Hebdo and Bataclan Theatre, Australia, Russia, Lebanon, and others that could potentially lay financial culpability on the US. This had significant effect on international relationships, too, that threaten the longest peace in Western Europe since Augustus Caesar. According to Vox, anti-immigrant backlash is driving support for Brexit, which was only exacerbated by continental Europe's refugee crisis. Rape is a significant and disturbing feature of Syrian war, according to NPR. Would the Leave campaign be as successful if Scandinavian NYT and German Reuters women were not being raped and assaulted in the hundreds? By weakening the EU with Brexit, as a result of xenophobic fears, Europe faces a crisis. At stake, purely and simply, Mr. Valls added, is the breakup of the Union. We have to invent another Europe. The US created the refugee crisis in Europe and is why Turkey may leave NATO. This is why Russia may invade the rest of Ukraine. This is why Trump wants to build a wall. In short, Assange did not overhype the ramifications of US involvement in Syria. South Korea is forcing President Park Geun-hye, if I pronounce that right, to flee for her life for similar accusations right now. Can we at least get a march going? It's worth noting that nothing in the Assange video suggests Assange is safe in the embassy. Watch it again, and you may see the edit where you don't see Pilger ask the questions about the FBI investigation, and Assange only makes a statement about the purpose of the FBI. Also, Pilger makes a statement about the last week of campaign, and Assange never addresses the statement. There is no establishing shot. Do you remember the Daily Show interviews and how they were cut? The only dates tied to the video are 10/13, referencing the Saudi Arabia funding, Assange's internet being cut off, and the Moroccan king email released 10/20. Those dates are important because it is speculated that Assange was taken from the embassy on the 20th to 21st of October. The only place the discussion is even allowed to happen is at r/conspiracy. For more information, see here. If you doubt it, see my post that got me banned from the WikiLeaks official sub when a mod told me to repost, then I was immediately banned for spam. The Assange factor. Assange wants to bring down Hillary because he knows she won't pardon him or his friend Chelsea Manning. But he is also not a Trump supporter. COG, continuity of government, wants to get Hillary or Trump elected, who would most likely renew COG, like Obama has done the past several times. They definitely don't want Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein, who would promptly throw their asses in the shit can. Why do you think Bernie was stomped out like a used cigarette butt? Now that Hillary is basically done for, and Assange's main goal of exposing her treason for all Americans to see is complete, they took him out of the picture. So what do we have left? COG Plan B, the Pied Piper candidate, aka Donald Trump, on the express lane to becoming POTUS. Not much dirt in his way. Meanwhile, Assange is unable to say or do anything about it. I believe this is why John Kerry, 7th Floor Group, aka Shadow Government, aka COG, forced Ecuador to cut off Assange's internet. COG was worried that Assange would interfere even further with the election and push people away from Donald Trump as well. Assange was itching to get his hands on Trump leaks. Where'd that effort go? The crickets are starting to worry. If both Hillary and Trump were pushed out, COG would either get put on the back burner or dissolved, but COG had contingency plan B in the works. Silence Assange and elevate Trump. It was even DNC's inner plan to elevate Trump. Think about it. Assange would have pushed third party if he had the chance, or possibly Bernie if he wasn't cheated out of the DNC. Conclusion? If Assange isn't allowed to interfere with the election to the point where his internet is cut off at the embassy, then why is he subsequently allowed to make a live teleconference call to CISL to discuss the election? And why is he allowed to do an interview with John Pilger and discuss the election just days before November 8th? And why wouldn't Sweden let him make a public appearance at Gavin McFadden's funeral for an hour, where he wouldn't be discussing the election? And here you can look at the article and go further into this, research it for yourself. This is all very incriminating information. Check it out. Thanks for watching, and please leave a comment, drop a like, subscribe if you find my videos informative.